There we go. Hello, TSL. Welcome to another episode of Repost and Riposte. Hope everybody is doing well and you've enjoyed the previous Quarantine TV programming from Monday and Tuesday. Today, I'm going to be talking about, let me just make sure my sound is working. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about more about bad habits that I see in fights in TSL and how to fix them. Specifically, let me bring it up here. Um, when I say cutting with the blade, I mean cutting with the blade is the right thing to do instead of cutting with our hands. So it's just proper cutting mechanics is kind of going to be the review today, and it'll just kind of be a good overview. It's good to revisit your cutting mechanics, especially when a lot of it's become second nature. And I know a lot of times we get the question that is, well, it's a polycarbonate blade. It doesn't actually cut through anything. It's a unidirectional blade. It doesn't actually, have a true edge and a false edge in the context of an actual physical edge. But it's still the mechanics that are applied in other sword-based arts. Doesn't matter what the mechanics of true edge, false edge, and the proper mechanics of a good cut are still valid and can benefit you greatly in a fight. Just that alone can sometimes mean the difference between you getting a point and someone not getting a point, and it's happened to me many, many times in a fight. So that is what I'm going to talk about today. And obviously, if you have any training related questions or things like that, I'm here to answer them. Um, and yeah, that is basically what I'm going to go into. I'm trying to think if there's any other updates that have happened. There was some great interviews with our owner, Charlie Cummings, on May the 4th through TPLA, also Combat Con 365. Our hosts for TSL 5, they also hosted Charlie and did an interview talking about the tournaments and everything. So that's something also you can seek out if you're looking for other TSL content other than just your regular scheduled Quarantine TV programming. And obviously everybody's kind of preparing for TSL 5, and we're hitting that, a little over 2 months until the time when we'll be restarting all of our restarting our events and having our annual international tournament. So either way, I'm going to now talk about the content. So, sorry, just making sure everything is set up here. And okay, so cutting with the blade. I'll just kind of give some overview here. So, if we're cutting with the blade, we want to make sure that we always talk about in a lot of martial arts that when you move into your opponent, you should always lead with your blade before your body. There are multiple reasons why we do that. One, it is a protective action. You're putting a target, the closest target then for your opponent to hit is in front of you. And putting your body first obviously makes that a larger target for your opponent to hit. So that's one reason. The other reason is um, basically you are deciding the mechanics of that action. So if you will engage with your opponent's blade, again, I'm not even speaking specifically to LED sabers, I'm speaking to any weapon. If you engage with your opponent's blade at a certain point in that extension, right? Say I'm just cutting in and I'm in that extension. I have more ability to move and maneuver and change the mechanics of it if it's not ideal, as opposed to if I move my body and I cut like this. I've already closed the distance. I have less room to maneuver, and if they have the advantage, that will be to my detriment. So that is kind of what I'm talking about. The main part I'm talking about, because I've talked already about leading with the body, um, or leading with the blade, not the body. The main thing I'm talking about is in your cutting mechanics, and that when you cut, there is a very common thing, and it comes from multiple things. One, people just do it out of habit, and then two, people do it, especially from a choreographed background. So I'm going to flip to my other camera here, and I'm going to kind of, yeah, that didn't do anything. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay. So I'm just going to move my cord here for my power cord for the computer there. So, okay. So I'm just going to start with the short, I'll do the long one. So, yeah, actually, I think the short one I'll be able to illustrate a little bit better on camera. So let me turn the iPad so I can see what it looks like a little bit. All right. So what I'm talking about is we all, it does not matter what weapons-based martial art you came from, one-handed, two-handed, with the exception, I'm going to say, of rapier. Any cutting-based weapon. So that could be European, Asian, it doesn't matter if it has edges, if it's like a sword-like or knife-like object, you've learned a basic cutting pattern. So a lot of times that cutting pattern will look something like, 1, 2, and then this is 3, and the diagonal upward cuts 4, and then there's some horizontal cuts 5, 6, and sometimes maybe there's a 7, sometimes there's an 8, sometimes there's a thrust. There's a lot of systems. But what I'll focus on right now is I will focus on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And obviously my stance is a little off, so I'll fix that. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm talking about those 6 cuts. I mean, the same thing with 7, and that's not even actually a good 7, but you can do that. But I'm gonna ignore the 7 because very rarely, in my opinion, do I ever need to come over top like that with a two-handed. Sometimes I might do that where I, do a full swing, like a one-handed kind of thing, like a cast, which is like kind of out of Barjitsu or cane in other Victorian martial arts. But so I'm going to focus on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A lot of times when someone is just starting out and we say, hey, this is a 1 cut, all right, this is a 2 cut, this is a 3 cut, this is a 4 cut. And we'll just say 1 and 2 right now. This is a 1 cut, this is a 2 cut. Cutting at the shoulder, or at the diagonal. A lot of times what people will do is they will cut like this. And I'm gonna grab the larger one because it probably will be a little easier. It is white, so it might be a little hard to see on the background, but I just gotta be mindful of my walls there. But if a lot of people are gonna cut, they're gonna cut with 1, and that's how you're gonna see them cut, right? The problem that is created, I mean, there's a couple problems with that, but the biggest problem is that, right now, say I'm just in like Posta di Donna or Woman's Guard, right, in an Italian school, and I extend my arm and I go to cut. The closest target is my hand, is my arm. The closest target is not this. This is now a vertical, and it's basically in line with my arm. So yes, they could hit my blade, but it's much more convenient for them to hit my arm. And if they have proper cutting mechanics, they probably will hit your arm. What I'm talking about is basically when we cut, that our blade is leading, and then we complete the cut. How do we do that? The first thing is on those diagonal cuts that we are bringing it down. We are pushing and pulling, right? What I mean is you've probably heard the push-pull. On a basic concept, it means that I am pushing with my front arm, pulling with my back hand, and I'm pushing my blade out while creating that downward momentum. So essentially, if it was an actual target, like if it's Bob here, and I want to cut through Bob, again, assuming I don't have an LED saber that cuts right through him, I would cut, make the incision, and then complete the cut. Obviously with a little more force than that if I was trying to cleave through someone, but we're not doing that. So we're just talking about making the simple cut and then following through. And in the case of TSL, a lot of times the push-pull to the extension is all you need to complete that 1 cut. But in the context of learning cutting patterns and learning how to flow between your saber, it can be more useful to it can be more useful to make sure that you're knowing the whole follow through. And that will help when you translate, if you translate to other weapons, or if you start getting involved in cutting. I'm not hugely versed in cutting. I've done it a few times for fun, but from everything I've heard people who are experts in it talk about, it is very much, and when I say cutting, I'm talking about like cutting tatami mats or meat or, or something like that. We're not talking about cutting water bottles, which doesn't require a whole lot of effort if the blade is sharp enough. So I'm talking about extending and getting that full cut, because the reason being, and I said about, if I cut like this, my arm is out. It's the closest target. If I cut like this, right, you can see where's my arm. It pulls back, this arm, and my blade is leading, right? This is the closest target. It protects my arm. We have the subas here for some minimal protection, but the blade is also protecting, and then we're bringing it down and completing the cut. Same thing on two, right? Just got to be careful of if I cut like this and bring my arm down, right, and I don't bring anything back, and I just kind of cut with my arm is now the closest target, and then I've basically passed down in front of me and made that a target. As opposed to if I do the push-pull, bam, right? Some theoretically also in longsword, this is also a false edge cut, but we'll just do it as a true edge cut. So bringing that down in front, if I'm kind of turned weird to the camera, sorry. There. But there is, you can see the blade is tipping in front of me, and it's properly protecting myself. On that concept alone, I can point to multiple fights, sparring matches where I've had someone cut down at my shoulder, right? And I've kind of matched them with this, right? And we made blade to blade contact. And strictly on the point that they cut with their hands, not their blade, I got the point, because essentially when it lined up like that, my blade got in front of me when their hands got in front of them. So by leading with their hands, as soon as my blade made that contact, it basically gave me that free and open shot. You can also find that actually in the binding mechanics. The reason being, I said, is if you take that cut and you you hit the blade, and maybe you're on their forte or their strong, and you need to change something. Well, I haven't actually moved too much yet. Maybe I've taken a step, right? I haven't moved that much, so I can make a change, right? I can do things that can change it up. I can twist it right into a false edge. I can do different things. But if I leave here, right, and then I complete it here, I've pretty much already started to lower my arm, and my arm is in a downward action, and I don't have as much to go because the momentum here drives me down. But here, I can still, at this point, I can still shift and maneuver as I need to with my arms. My legs, either way in this, whether I cut with my hands or my arms, I should be able to make adjustments. But with that arm action, it makes it a heck of a lot easier. Just gonna double check comments, make sure there's nothing here. Cool. Excellent training tip. Yeah, no problem. Didn't see who that was. So I know Facebook doesn't give me a name sometimes. Sorry. Michael. Thank you, Michael. So yeah, that's a big thing to think about, is that getting that blade in front of you on the cuts, and it really is important to work on those cutting mechanics. As tired as it feels, as boring as it can feel at times, the importance of just working through, and I'm just being mindful of my ceiling, 3, 4, right, 5, 6, right. Okay. I'm gonna just, while I'm showing the other stuff and going up, I'm gonna switch to the shorter one, because if I do, I won't hit my ceiling. So okay, so I talked about 1 and 2, right? We're bringing it in front of us. Right? Now there's 3 and 4, the ascending cuts, right? These two are descending down, right? These two are ascending cuts up. Now this one is it feels a little weirder, especially if you're newer to it. But a lot of people cut like this. Again, same problem. Your hand is in front of is the closest target. You're presenting your hand to be struck. Whereas if I do the same thing in an upward fashion, I pull on the lever hand and I push and then I bring it up, right? I pull and I bring it up, right? It's the same thing. And pardon my stance. I'm realizing that I'm way off balance because it feels weird to do these. So let me do it like this. There we go. So pull, pull. So that is so basically I don't lead with my hand. My blade is getting in front. So if they walk into it or they decide to cut down and I'm cutting up, my blade is in front of me, right? So it's the same thing with that. It's making sure that I have properly led with the blade as opposed to the hand. And I'm just going to I'll show it one-handed for all of them in a sec. And again, that's just more about that push-pull. 5-6, it feels slightly different, because here, it's very easy to do this. So if I'm swinging like a baseball, that's how I swing a baseball, right? I stand here and I go like this. Yes, I get good momentum, but protective-wise, my arm is the leading, my hand and arm is the leading point. So I need to do it from here, right? So I'm going to start here and I'm just going to rotate. Again, same with the pull in the lever hand, and I rotate. Pull in the lever hand, rotate, and then I'm cutting across, right? And then in reality, like with a longer blade, I'm literally just doing this. I can do that, but it doesn't matter. I'll try it here just very slowly. Bam, 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 bam. Not perfect, but again, I'm inches from hitting the side there. But that's the key thing with that one is that it's again with that lever hand and letting that blade get in front of you. Your Suba, if you have a Suba or even if you don't, at the emitter point is a good guideline for it. If you see, and that's not in front of your hand, your top hand, you're leading with your hand. So if I'm here, I know here's my emitter. Okay, cool. Not getting by me. The blade is completely in front of me on those cuts. Now I'll just go over it briefly with a one-handed. Again, it's a similar thing. It doesn't matter where you grip it, whether you're gripping it up near a Suba with a longer blade or down here at the pommel, right? It's the same thing. It's cutting like that. So the difference is that I'm using a little bit more in my wrist as opposed to in two arms, which is, a lever handle, right? So I don't have that, right? So even if I'm gripping here, I need to tip. It's the direction of my wrist, right? So if I'm, do it this way. And that one I actually did cut a little bit with my hand too much, right? I'm cutting at those proper blade leading angles. So I'm clearing it. This is especially important with a one-handed option because you might have to be using a little more strength to do beat attacks if you're fighting a two-handed fighter or something like that. So doing this with my hand fully exposed is going to get me killed, right? Mainly because they're going to hit this. They have one target to aim for. They know you're not doing anything with this hand, so you're pretty much out of luck. They know that they don't have to worry about that. So they know that's all they got a target for, and they know they're stronger than you. So they're going to use that time that you're taking to cut, to your advantage. So if you don't get in front of you, that's going to be a problem. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'm missing with that one-handed, but the idea is just that, it's the same thing with it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's just all for my wrist. If I'm incorporating my elbow, one-handed cuts become a little bit different because you can cut from. So if I'm cutting from my shoulder, that's bad, right? That's too bad. That's not what I want to do with a one-handed cut. Good warm-up, I'll tell you that. It is a nice warm-up for your shoulders, doing a big wide cutting pattern without the right mechanic. But okay, bam, 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 bam. You know, you can do those bigger, wider cuts. You just got to use your wrist and your elbow to tip your blade with the one into that point. If I don't tip my blade, if I just cut like this with a big shoulder cut, right, my hand is fully exposed, right? But if I go like this and then here I extend up, here I extend up, right, and then I'm cutting into them, and I don't have to worry about it as much, right? And that's another way to consider it. So the key thing is to think about is like with the one-handed, there's a little bit more wrist pointing as opposed to lever pulling. Your wrist is still pointing, but you have control, you have balance with this system, with this kind of push pull thing that I was talking about. So I'm trying to think if there's anything I missed. Let's just see here if there's anything else. All right. So Michael was asking, it seems a lot of people, flip the camera. It seems a lot of people offer their hands, but if you take those points, you become a hand hunter. And then he also said, this is different for me. Usually if someone strikes a valid target, you need to work on your technique to protect your hands. So, okay. So yeah, so there's an argument to be had about, hand hunting. I typically, if I'm talking about where I'm targeting someone, if I'm going to be hitting them in that general area with good mechanics, if they're offering their hands, I tend to try to aim for the wrist. The wrist is just as open. It's just an inch further back. Sometimes that only takes just a little extra reach, or a very, very slight step, or even sometimes just a raising of my toe, and like a lean, without losing my balance. You can do those things. Um, I would say you are a hand hunter if you're hitting someone in the fingers, which are not a valid target. If you're hitting them repeatedly in that area, then yes. If you're aiming for their arm and you hit their hand sometimes, which happens with me, and occasionally I'll hit the fingers, and sometimes people block with their hands. I mean, I had a whole thing about people blocking with their hands. So you're not going to be able to avoid every single scenario where people are blocking with their hands, but it is still very it's the closest target. If they're presenting a closer target, and you're not purposely like obviously, again, this is all about control too, because even though I'm going to use these cutting mechanics, I don't need to use a whole lot of power or speed to make this happen. I just need to get the mechanics in. And actually, there's a whole element of using your core and everything with cutting that you can, if you look up like cutting mechanics with any weapon, you can kind of figure it out. But that's a little more it's a little more outside my wheelhouse where I would feel comfortable explaining it, because how I do it might be slightly different, and I don't necessarily have the terminology. There is a great book on cutting. It's called "Cutting with the Medieval Sword" by, I think it's Michael Edelson. It's a more of a modern manual about proper cutting mechanics. It goes a little in depth. It is more about like cutting actual targets, as opposed to cutting in the context of sparring. But I would say that the cutting mechanics can save you so much time and power and speed that you can save. You can conserve it. So you don't. Yes, as Christian says here, Star Wars is all about losing hands. I remember hearing someone talk about a possible TSL rule set, and they were literally talking about a way to offer extra points for if you can take their wrist, specifically the wrist, not the hand itself, not the fingers. Specifically, if you can take the wrist to elbow area, um, because of the history with losing hands and arms in canon. So that was an interesting conversation. I don't know that it's hard to apply and our judges would have to get a lot better with. We'd have to actually start calling out target. Well, we call out target locations, but they are only to indicate a valid target. They're not to indicate a point value or anything like that. Where if you could cut someone right here and get an extra point, your judges better be spot on that you're actually getting hit there. That you're actually hitting your opponent there. So it is all about losing your hands. I mean, yes. If if you if you are cutting with the proper mechanic and you are sorry, if you're cutting with the proper mechanic and you are striking the same location, yes, someone does need to work on their technique. But the big thing is that honestly, I see way too many people cutting with their hands. And again, like I said, this is a background where there can be a lot of reasons why that happens. And it's not really all related to, oh, it's just because like they were trained poorly or something like that. Sometimes it can be just muscle memory is already there too. I said about how in choreography I did this problem. That's why I know it, because of my background before TSL was in fight choreography with sabers, and we would do that because we wanted to cue to our opponent that we were our partner, that we were properly getting the cut out there. So we were leading with our hands purposely. It makes it a bigger, more dramatic action. Like it's like, "Yarrr!" Like it's a big heavy thing. But also on top of that, our blade is behind us, so our opponent has plenty, or our partner. I keep saying opponent, but in choreo it's partner. Has plenty of time to block the strike. Um, and that's how sometimes how also you can do like improvised scenes in choreography and things like that. But it does translate a bad habit into sparring. And what I'll also say is there are ways to do choreography and incorporate proper cutting mechanics as well, so the fight looks better. I've seen that too. There's ways of queuing up your opponent. There's I keep saying opponent, but there's ways of queuing up your partner using proper cutting mechanics. So it's just about making sure that you're properly getting that blade in front. And in my opinion, it looks better because the blade is traveling in a nice angle, as opposed to here, and the blade is just traveling like that. It looks cooler when the blade actually gets flicked forward. And I think visually it can look better, but I would argue that that's a more advanced choreography technique. I would not teach that to beginners necessarily, um, but some do, and it all depends on the ability of the teacher. And I will say, I was adequate at choreography. I wasn't stupendous. So it's one thing to it's just thinking about the usage of what you're doing and what bad habits you might have that indicate that. So, like another thing to think about is, we're presenting our hands. Another reason someone might present their hand is because they're used to something with a large guard, right? Maybe they're used to like a broadsword or a single stick or something like that. And in reality, they should be using proper cutting mechanics too. But you know, you can sort of keep your hand out and then cut it out like that if you have a basket of broadsword that covers your entire hand, because you're leading with that. So if their blade hits your guard, you've basically blocked it, and then you can it gives you a little bit of an advantage there. So that's another scenario in which people might bring that kind of bad habit. But honestly, sometimes they just see you pick up a weapon and it feels uncomfortable. It is not necessarily natural for our body to want to go and extend like that, like to do a push pull to bring our blade in front and cut. It is not natural. Our body is used to going like this, right? If I'm gonna cut something out, right? If I'm gonna swing down, that's what I'm gonna do, right? I'm gonna just bring my arm down and put the thing in front of me. I'm not going to do this kind of action where I'm literally bringing it about in front of me and cutting forward. It's just not a natural action. But once you understand it and once you have the muscle memory for it, it feels incredibly natural. But that's any kind of muscle memory or that we're kind of working on when we're training. So I would keep that in mind, that to look at your cutting mechanics, and that's not even necessarily just related to this one thing. It's revisiting that basic element, because in all honesty, the things that are the easiest to remember when you are fighting are the basics. The complicated technique that requires three moves to do, yes, you can pull it off with enough practice. You can pull it off effectively. You can pull it off like it's no effort at all. But the primary things that you can really pull off with no effort should be the basic mechanics. It should be the ability to just cut with cut with a proper mechanic. So you are, one, putting your blade in front of you and protecting yourself. You're making the blade the closest target, not your hands. You're making sure that should they cut with poor mechanics, you have an advantage over them. You're making it also so if you do these proper mechanics, you actually are using more of your body, more of your core, as opposed to less of your hands. So if I'm cutting with my elbow like this, right, and I'm constantly cutting like that, I'm going to wear out my elbow over time. It's gonna get sore. I'm probably going to get like tendonitis. So that's something to think about, is that the way you focus on those cuts, as basic as it seems, the better you will be. I'm going to flip back over here, drink one thing here. So again, this is not a super complicated, it's not a super complicated concept. It's pretty straightforward to think about, you know, and it's easy for anyone at any level to work on it, and think about it. Because even me, like doing these, I would by no means call myself an expert. I would say again, I am adequate, with this option. Even just like where I was standing, I was kind of being a little awkward with my footwork. But if I'm working on that cutting mechanic, right, and I bring it down, and I'm working on this constantly, right, right, and then I'm going to feel more comfortable. Obviously, if you have a target, it's a wonderful way to handle it, right? So if I'm cutting, right, if I go like this to Bob, Bob's going to hit my arm. But if I go like this to Bob, I hit Bob before my arms ever got into that position, right? So Bob has to worry about that problem. Bob has to worry about, see, I'm going to hit everything in the, right? So, I mean, if I'm here, I can work on those same cutting mechanics, and then I can flip to one-handed, and I can do this, whole thing, and I can 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can start to think about that. Then say I got that down. Where do I go from there, right? Okay, there's obviously more to go through with the cutting, with the basic cutting pattern, things you can work on. How are you incorporating the rest of your body? How's the rotation of your hips? And again, some of these cutting mechanic things are a little more advanced concepts that are a little more beyond my ability to instruct on. So I don't want to like step out of my wheelhouse here a little bit, but the intention of, okay, am I doing something like this? Am I cutting with my elbow? Even if I get my blade out in front, did I make my elbow closer target, right? Did I do this, right? So dropping my elbows, keeping them in my body, push, pull, extend, bring it down. And then, okay, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing this anymore, right? So I'm in a guard and I'm doing this. Okay, good. That's a great part. What's the next thing to do? Well, I want to make sure I'm not using too much of my shoulder and my arms. So I'm going to start to work on getting some hip generation. So I'm going to be using my hips. So, I'm getting a little bit more power out of it, but I'm not using more force on my arms. It's not tiring me out. I have the great mechanics, and I'm using a little bit more hip power generation. And with that hip power generation, I'm going to hit a little bit harder, but obviously, again, you don't need to hit super hard. You don't need to hit someone that hard, right? I only need to hit them. But if I can get a little bit more hip generation, so I hit it like this, if I do the same thing with a little bit of hip generation, the same hip with my arm, hip generation creates a little extra. Ignore my form there. I was just kind of showing that when you start using the cutting mechanics with hip generation, you're going to help yourself as well. Then you can start thinking about footwork, right? What foot in front? Sometimes people do cutting mechanics and they go like this, and they go like this, right? Right. There's different options to think about that you can do to improve the elements of what you're doing and make each one that much smoother. And that foot movement will also help you to, then you can start to learn to step in which directions are optimal. So you can learn, okay, where am I going to step if I'm here and I'm going to cut? What's my best option? Well, I could, do something like that, right? That's a little more, I could pass forward. I could just do a very subtle, you know, lifting my elbow, lifting my toe and my heel and bringing it just slightly forward, right? And I'm not moving my back foot. I could pivot back to a kind of a center point and then move out from there. There's a lot of different options and maneuverability you can have. I know this kind of moves beyond the elements of a cutting mechanic, but it's also a way of revisiting the cutting pattern as a way to unlock all of these different combinations with, I'm only doing it with 6 moves, so 6 basic cuts. I'm not going any further outside of those 6 basic cuts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? I'm not doing anything fancy, and then I have a one-handed variation of that, right? So then I can start to think about, okay, what about here and then here, right? I'm going to cut 1 with one hand, or 1 with 2 hands, and 2 with one hand. So there's different ways, and then you kind of combine it all together. You start to think about what footwork works, and then you work on that and you spar with it and you try to see what has success, what fails. Trial and error is a big part of it, but it's just with a cutting pattern of 6 cuts with one hand and two hand and basic steps. And think about how many move combinations you potentially have. And I'm talking about like 2 to 3 move combinations, meaning like a step, a cut, maybe another step, or a step and 2 cuts or something like that, or even 2 steps and a cut moving into like some type of four move combo. You have all of these options and you can figure out what works, what doesn't work, and they're not all going to work. I'm not saying like, oh, these cuts are unstoppable. They're going to have application for different solutions or for different areas and different times, but it's a great way to experiment with the very, very fundamentals, work on harnessing those fundamentals, getting good cutting mechanics, and then spreading out from there to other moves. I'm not even talking, last week I talked about the lunge. I'm not even talking about thrusts or lunges. This is just in the cutting game. So, and you can do the same thing with lunges, figuring out steps and what kind of, thrust or lunge. It's a little more, a little less robust as far as like, when you lunge, it's really about targeting, and there's certain things you can do with a lunge, but they're in combination. So they are more specific mechanically. But here, I can pretty much do this from any spot that I want to. I don't have to worry about throwing off my balance as much because I'm kind of a little, even if I'm here and I'm fighting in a one-handed style with cuts, it doesn't matter. I can do a lot of different things. I can see like what happens if I go and I cut here. Okay, so I'm cutting to their outside and I'm leading properly with my blade and I step and bam. Okay, how does that feel? Good. Now let's try that with the bad step. What happened there? Well, by pointing my foot away from my opponent, it drew my blade a little more to the left. I was a little more off target. That's things to experiment with as well. So I know that's a little bit of a tangent, but I think that's a useful thing to expand upon with the with cutting mechanics. So, all right. I know it's only 42 minutes, so Are there any questions about that I can answer? Clarifications, anything that doesn't make sense? Are there other training questions that I can answer right now? Now is the time. So, because that pretty much wraps up what I was going to say about cutting with the blade and considering that. As I mentioned, we know it's a 360-degree blade. There is no specifically true edge or false edge. But if I don't cut with what I would consider the true edge or the false edge, but I'm not talking about false edge cuts right now, that's a whole different element of the game. So if I'm just talking about your traditional true edge cuts that we learn, there's you want to still make sure that your hand positioning, true edge meaning that your knuckles are what are out, right? So if this is the blade, right, that's kind of what's happening, as opposed to say like, oh, I'm going to cut weird like this, or I'm going to cut weird like this. If you cut with the flat of the blade, you will have less mechanic on your side. And again, this is excluding false edge. False edge is a totally different game. So it would take me a while to explain, and I don't think it would be. I could explain how to do it well, but I couldn't demonstrate because I don't have a partner to specifically show it off. So that would be the issue with me showing that off. So, all right. So I'm not seeing any comments. So then I will start to wrap up, and if something pops up, I'll talk about it. A couple things. So I have that will wrap up this week's thing. So let me just put that 5, 6. Okay, just marking it off on my list that I did cover that topic. So far, episodes we have covered: fighting in a straight line. We've talked about chasing the blade. We've talked about taking too big of steps. We've talked about lunging. We've talked about leaning your head forward, and we've talked about cutting with the hand and not the blade. So making sure that our blade is what's leading us, not our hand. So we're creating that area of protection. So thank you, Daniel. Good to see you, sir. I hope to see you soon, sometime this year at some event, depending what that is. So I have those. So I have a couple other topics. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more on this bad habits and how to fix them. And then I will add that I've been considering a new segment. It will be much shorter. It would not be a full-length show segment. It would kind of be just in addition to this or any other main topic that I'm talking about. Came up with it when we were on Alex's show on Monday. We were talking about just movies and stuff like that, and like Princess Bride and all these different movies. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, there's something I could probably grab from most fight scenes in movies. And I say good ones. I don't even necessarily mean, and I don't mean necessarily the big choreographed things. I mean, like, if I can grab something that is literally practical from a movie fight scene and apply it to something in our sport. It's a challenge for me to find it. It's a challenge for me to extrapolate it and explain it and explain why it's a good thing, even though it's a cinematic context is different from a fight context. So I want to try to take that challenge. So maybe I'll get started with that next week. So if you have movies that you feel, I'm not going to do any of the Star Wars movies to start. We're just going to stay away from those. I really can't show too many clips from it. So the intention would be that I show like a 5-second clip, because that will probably get me off the copyright radar, because I'm not trying to rebroadcast it. I'm literally using commentary on it, but I want to make sure that I can show people what happens, what scene it is, and then they can look at it and say like, okay, this is what he's talking about. So like, I had the idea like, oh, what if I looked at what practical techniques for LED saber could I pull out of, say, if you know the Korean movie Old Boy, what could I pull out of the hammer hallway sequence? There's probably something there. It doesn't necessarily mean a specific attack. It could mean a specific defensive maneuver, a specific footwork, timing, tempo, any of those kind of things. So that's what I would say is something that I look forward to in some future episodes. Hopefully, either next week or the week after. It depends. So, all right. Christian said, anything on counters if you get caught mid cut, meaning them cutting into your cut, landing on your guard. So I assume we're talking like landing on your suba, kind of thing. Like, so assuming you've cut properly, you did not cut with your hands. If they're cutting as well, how to change it up? Yeah, sure. I can go into that. That's pretty easy. All right. So, all right. It's around. Okay. So what we're assuming, I think, is that, I do a cut and they come down and they hit my guard. Now, obviously, in the context of a fight with the Suba, it doesn't always just nicely capture it. Sometimes it can slip off or something like that and hit our arm. So we have to be mindful of that. I'm going to say this in a basic way. There is, with the proper cutting mechanics, you'll probably get yourself out of most situations. But because of the bouncing, energy transference nature of these blades, it's going to be more difficult to get around it, right? And it's going to be unpredictable at times because you don't always know what your opponent's doing. So if I'm in mid cut, I'm here, and the blade is coming down here, and maybe it's coming down, and they have a little extra momentum to go, and if they keep going, they could hit my arm. So some options, and again, it just depends on it really depends on the scenario. So what I would recommend is with a sparring partner, and I know Christian, you got some, is work on those. So once you have the cutting mechanics down, work on someone catching you mid cut. So they know you're going to do this. So they know like right here, they're going to start to cut. So they're going to try to cut at your arm, right? So things to think about. You can always use your footwork. What I would recommend with footwork in this context is not stepping back on it unless you have unless I'm this close to Bob, right, and where I have like a couple inches I can still go on that cut. I shouldn't step back, right? Because if I'm here and I'm just in Bob's distance and I'm going to hit his shoulder, me stepping back, right? If I step back like here, I'm gonna be clear. Even just a little bit, I'm gonna be clear, right? So I want to make sure that if I was here, yeah, I could probably step back, right? I could do that. But in this case, for most scenarios of this kind of being interrupted mid-cut, I'm going to say do not step back. Fight that instinct to retreat. Think about how you can move to the side, to an angle, or forward sometimes even, depending on the scenario, to maneuver around it. There's another aspect to this, and the other aspect is your hand and arm placement. But I'm just starting with this as a basic thing. So if I cut and I'm getting interrupted, right, and they're going to cut down on me, and let's say this is the target that they're aiming for because this is protected by the Suba, but maybe it'll bounce off the Suba, it'll go down, it'll hit this hand, right? So there's a couple options, right? I could step over. So I could do just a basic step, right, and complete, and then do something and adjust my blade, right? I could step over here. I could step into them, right? If they're here and they're coming down here, and I did something like this and stepped at an angle towards their blade, I could theoretically still take the hit, but I've also changed the angle on them. Now granted, I wouldn't just hold my hand out here. I would probably bring my arm up a little bit and kind of, get a thrust in there or get into my opponent a little bit more. But those are options. Again, it's going to vary. So you want to try it with the different cutting locations. and have your opponent do it, and then feel how it how it bounces, because that's the big thing, that the unpredictability thing is that the bounce of this and where it hits on the blade versus the guard is going to change, and it's going to make this feel weird. So I would give completely well, I wouldn't give completely different advice. I would say you'd be able to trust your guard a little bit more with those mechanics with a with something with, like, say, Quillins with a long sword. But with this, you only have the Suba, so we need to rely on our mechanics, trust those. But if something changes with that, you can change the angle, right? So little things I can do. I can move my. I wouldn't recommend actually the Tutavolta, because that's a little more advanced and has to do with mechanics, but it's something to think about, right? If I can move and keep myself balanced, see, and when I cross like that, I'm not balanced. So if I step here where I'm not crossing my back foot, that might help me just get that little bit of angle. Maybe I can tuck that arm back a little bit. Maybe I can angle this out a little bit more. But maybe if I'm here or if I'm here, that's a common one. I mean, honestly, that's one I see people do a lot in longsword tournaments. Is a very common one cut. That they love doing that. They love just getting to that outside. So they have really good mechanics. They make contact with the blade, and then bam, right? There's ways to do it with, like, a walk, you know. Figure out what is balanced for you, because that's a big element of it. But my basic advice is, if you're going to incorporate footwork to adjust it, is that you are moving side to side. So basically, like, if that's a line there, that I'm moving side to side on that cut, or at an angle, right? Or forward, or some combination of this. I am not, I mean, sometimes back at an angle can work, you know, but I would say it should be a shorter step then. If you're going to do that, if you move your back foot, the distance between your blade and your opponent changes. As soon as I do this, my blade is coming back, right? The only way it's not is if I do a one-handed move, and then I'd lose strength, right? If I can move my back foot and keep my blade the same, that is something to consider as well. Didn't think about that at first. If I cut and they cut into me, I can move my back foot. So say they were going to bounce over and maybe get across to my arm. I can move that, and that will move my body back a little bit while not shifting my blade's position, right? So the front foot is your body, the distance between your opponent's blade and your body. The back foot is, I think I'm explaining this right as I was taught it. Your back foot is the distance between your opponent's blade and your body. Because it, like, as soon as or your blade, I'm sorry, in your opponent's body. Because as soon as I do that, I step back, no matter what happens. So I want to avoid that step back, unless you have no other choice. And I find that you always have another choice. The other thing to do is to consider rotations into certain guards. So if I cut here, and I mentioned, like, rotating, right? Sometimes that's the way to go. Sometimes, okay, I'm here and they're going to try to come over top of my blade and hit my guard. Maybe I need to, bring it over, right? So that's not a guard. That's more of a, just a rotation. But that combined with, say, stepping over like that is a pretty good move, right? So it's thinking about, as making that quick shift. If you bind with someone, that you can quickly use that back lever to shift your blade somewhere else. You can rotate your wrist somewhere to shift the angle. The other thing to do is, when I said about rotations between guards, sometimes, okay, so go here, and then I can rotate it back to my hip, or maybe I want to get over top of their blade, so I rotate down. Not that I would really recommend that, because you're trying to hit them, and that's not necessarily, you might hit them in an inadvertent target. But there is things like raising it up here. You could do something as simple as, I'm going to do one from here. So if I'm here, right, I could do something as simple as, bam, right? Just a little raise up, right? Maybe gives me a little extra protection. But you combine that with that little bit of footwork, And I say little bit of footwork because none of it should be big moves. I've talked about big steps. I mean, this is all like that's all I need to move, right? To get some of these actions to really actually make the difference. Because we should be talking about the inches it takes, the inches of space you're either closing or you're creating for your opponent to have to overcome, while not giving yourself taking extra time with these big moves and everything. So hopefully that makes sense. That's kind of how I would approach it, is that um, you really need to feel it out with a partner. You need to mess this up a bunch of times because then the other thing you'll learn is like where your blade makes contact with their blade in a cut. So if you get interrupted mid cut and they hit your blade on a certain part of your target, certain part here, certain ones are going to feel better than others. There's times where I've gotten hit here and it's very bouncy here, right? But their blade bounces off and then they hit me. Certain times here, it's, the mesa can sometimes be a sweet spot for that. Certain times they hit here and they can pull my blade down a little bit. It depends on the force and what angle they're cutting at, but there's different things that can happen with that. But yeah, just thinking about maneuvering at an angle or forward, right, or some combination, twisting or rotating, right? What changes with rotation, and what changes if you move to a guard, and then combine all three of them. But in reality, really, if you work on the cutting mechanics and you fail at it a bunch of times, and you see the timing, because sometimes what I like to do is I like to see them come in with a cut, and then I like to interrupt their cut with a good cut, and that's a good move. But you have to work on that timing. You have to see that, oh, if they are here on me, if they're cutting properly, it's too late for me to start the cut. But if they're only here, I have enough time to interrupt it. And I know I'm only talking about like two diagonal cuts crossing off, but it could be the same thing if I was down here and I was going to cut up at them like this and cut away their blade, and try to hit them. So if I was cutting from here and they interrupted me mid cut with, say, a downward action, yeah, then I definitely want to change up my angle. So I would say, bam, right? I would step out here and then probably extend. It just depends on. I think I'm thinking about that scenario properly, but it's hard without a sparring partner right in front of me anyway. So hopefully, Christian, that answers your question. That it's a good thing to think about because majority of this using cutting mechanics, you can simulate it on a target. You can work on it cutting against air, but nothing quite replaces the ability to make contact with someone's blade as you're doing it and how it feels. Because each weapon is different, and especially our weapon, which transfers a lot of energy, has bounce to it. It's a little weird, so it's working on that piece by piece. So, all right. Don't see any other questions. Okay, so coming up with future Quarantine TV stuff, we have Alec on Monday, back around again. Mark with Stand and Stab on Tuesday, and I'm back on Thursday. We are talking about having a once a month kind of show where Mark, Alec, myself, and Joe Pavlenko kind of rant about the kind of the off topic chats we get into, sometimes related to fighting, sometimes related to other things, and we can just kind of have that four-way roundtable kind of thing. So we're going to be incorporating that sometime in the near future. I don't have a specific date because we're still in the early planning stages for it, but that is what we're talking about, and hopefully that sounds interesting. And there should be one or two other Quarantine TV things coming up in the next couple months or so. It just depends. Some people have expressed interest, but it is obviously a time consuming activity, and it can be difficult, and you can feel uncomfortable sometimes talking in front of a camera. I'm not saying I'm comfortable with it yet, but I am much more comfortable than I was last year when I first started doing this. So, uh, all right. So, if you are watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. Obviously, you can like and subscribe even if you're on Facebook, but like and subscribe to the Saber Legion YouTube. That is something we really appreciate. If you have questions, you can still post them in the chat, and I will try to get back to them. And I think, yeah, that is everything that I have to talk about. I don't have any more, so I'll just leave it from there. And united through Sabers. And take care, everybody.